Video from my July 2019 trip to Sulawesi, Indonesia. Sulawesi is one of the many islands in the Indonesian archipelago, but this one is home to Lembeh Strait. And if you're a macro photographer like I am, this is one of your probably top 3 destinations for macro photography, and it did not disappoint. Indonesia is a volcanic island chain as part of the Ring of Fire, and here you can actually see a thermal vent that is off-flowing heated water that is, creating a glimmer effect. You can actually feel quite the temperature difference. Here's the inside of a cave at about 100 feet, and this is indicative of some of the topography of the area. There were actually 3 different dive sites that I hit. Basically, I did a tour of the northern region of Sulawesi, staying 3 days in each resort. The first part of the trip was in the Manado area, and the highlight by far was an island called Bunaken. It was wall dives with giant sponges, sea turtles everywhere. It also had a pretty decent area with nudibranches. I then went north and stayed a few days in Bangka Island. I wasn't as impressed by Bangka Island. It didn't have quite the same impressive walls as Bunaken, and it didn't have the macro and just weird stuff of Lembeh Strait. Still, it was beautiful diving. The coral here acts as home for fish. Here you can see an entire school of fish living inside one coral head. They would dart in and out, avoid predators by hiding within the branches. Very cool to see. Oftentimes we would encounter these schools of catfish. These were really quite amazing for the way that they feed. As you'll see in a second, they essentially feed by tumbling over each other. One dips its head in, takes a bite of sand, and then the next one piles on top, and it just moves in this living wave of tiny little catfish feeding. Very cool experience. This, however, was one of the items that was on my bucket list. This is a flamboyant cuttlefish. It's a tiny little critter. Smaller than a baseball. I'd say between a baseball and maybe a ping pong ball. But it is absolutely gorgeous. As you'll see here in a second, it struts down the reef, changing colors with its chromatophores. This one I actually saw during the day. I saw a total of 4 different specimens, which was more than I could have hoped for. Here's video from a night dive of one working his way down the reef. He would use my lights to feed by firing off his tentacle at little krill and other invertebrates. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely fantastic. I was so thrilled. This is another specimen from that same night dive. What was kind of funny was, as I was trying to take pictures of these guys, or trying to video them, blue-spotted stingray would come over and start to feed. And they would feed by flapping their wings in the sand, basically looking for mollusks and other crustaceans to eat, which would absolutely destroy the visibility. But still, you can see him flashing his chromatophores, this undulating wave of color going down its body as it prances down the sand. I was so thrilled. This and a hairy frogfish were my 2 goal critters of the trip. Now, the cephalopods are one of my favorite, and this was probably my favorite encounter overall of the trip. This is a coconut octopus. We found this little guy covering himself in trash, because that's what they do, is they cover themselves in objects, usually coconuts or shells, to act as a hiding place. So here, the guide actually gave him a proper shell as a substitute, After feeling it with his arms a little bit to make sure it wasn't some sort of Trojan horse or trap, it grabbed the shell and walked down the sand. Finally, when it figured out a position that it felt comfortable in, it buried himself in the sand and popped his mobile home over his head. Such a cool encounter. I was so happy to get rid of some trash and give him the natural tools that he uses. But that's not to say that all of the encounters were with tiny little animals. Here on a night dive in the house reef in Lembeh, I found this really, really large crab, maybe a foot in diameter, with a sponge that was attached to its back, walking down the reef, trying to escape my lights. Really quite interesting. There were a number of really large, beautiful fish that I encountered on this dive. Here was a rather large octopus that had blended perfectly into the reef. Hadn't seen it until one of the dive guides pointed it out. Apparently, the only way he saw it was because he saw the suckers sticking out at one point. The octopus's ability to change both its color and its skin texture is amazing and really provides for absolutely incredible camouflage. Unless you know what you're looking for, they're super easy to miss. Also, we found a giant stingray. This one was probably 3.5 to 4 feet across from wingtip to wingtip. It was just sitting against a wall, and I didn't want to get too close because I didn't want to scare it. But of course, if you're going to Lembeh, the whole point is for the nudibranchs, and it did not disappoint. Here's a video of one just moving down the reef. And this is why it can be hard to take a good picture of them. You know, you're trying to get the right of force and focus using a narrow depth of field, and they're moving the whole time in current. But it's hard to describe the variety of nudibranchs that were here. It was absolutely fantastic and any macro lover's dream. I cannot wait to go back.